This is one of my favorite topics, partly because not only will we talk about specific ways of generating sales from webinars in this case, but the principles are almost universally applicable. So if you have questions during the presentation, as mentioned in the introduction, we'll be taking those via chat, and then we'll get you out of here at the top of the hour. So if we do have additional questions that we don't have time for today, then I'll follow up with each of you individually. So please go ahead and ask your questions early and often, and then I'll also have a little spot that'll be a reminder for you. So one of the things that I discovered early on in working with webinars, my background previous to webinars and previous to working with GoToWebinar about 10 years ago, was more in seminars, and seminars were very hard to scale, very expensive to take, say, your roadshow out to try and reach 100% or close to 100% of your market. But one of the great things about video and online events and webinars, whatever term you want to use, is that literally even the smallest company can reach virtually every prospect that you have in your marketplace, especially with email invitations, which tend to drive 80+% of the webinar registrants. And through some of the strategies that we'll share with you today, virtually any company can position themselves as a market leader. I'm going to give you some case studies here of companies that I've worked with that have specifically done this, and the average size of those companies is about 30 employees. So if you're trying to compete with a big guy or you have a small budget, want to get the most out of it, then these strategies that we share today should be helpful. So the metaphor or the perspective that I come from is early on is we wanted to have a big impact when we started trying webinars, say about 15 years ago. And one of the things we tried was I was working with a company of, I think of a company about 30 people. It was the end of the year. We didn't have any marketing budget, but we really wanted to position ourselves for a good year the following year. So we asked the question, how do we fill the marketing funnel, or how do we get new names into our marketing database that then we can market and sell to throughout the rest of the year? So I was talking to my marketing manager about that, and my idea was, well, what would be a must-see event? And he said, oh, I know exactly the topic, and I know an outside speaker who could present, and I think we could get co-sponsors. Because at the time, even though we didn't have marketing budget, we needed co-sponsors to literally pay for our webinar technology. So this was pre-GoToWebinar days. So we recruited co-sponsors and basically held what turned out to be the topic of the year in the marketplace. So think about, especially when Steve Jobs was working with Apple, when there was a new iPhone launch or a new product that Apple would launch, in that marketplace, it was literally the must-attend event of the year. So that's what we did with our specific marketplace, and through our co-sponsors, and again, not a dime was spent on external marketing. The result was we had over 2,054 registrants. About half of those folks attended. Obviously, all of those went into the company that I was working with database for marketing. We ran, after the event, we ran a 30-minute commercial or introduction to our own technology, which over 500 people attended. And sales of the product were up 70% in the next calendar year, largely through the names and the momentum and the positioning that we had created through this program. And the CEO at the time said literally this was the best marketing plan he'd ever experienced in his 25 years in the industry. So each one of you in the audience, whether you're a webinar or content marketing veteran, or like many of you, you're new to webinars, this is all within your power. And so what I'm going to try and share with you from more of a producer's perspective is what are 3 key strategies for a blockbuster online event that sell. So we're going to talk about copy, we're going to talk about connecting with your audience, and we're going to talk about converting to next steps and sales. And my perspective is more not necessarily as an actor or a speaker, but really a director and producer kind of behind the scenes. So trying to create hundreds and hundreds of events, and each one trying to make it best we can, and then what kind of separates the blockbuster that will really move the needle for your company and in your marketplace versus the also-rans. So by copy, we mean attracting the attention of your target audience. and pulling them in like a magnet. So think of a magnet, and just your market just can't stay away. They have to register for your event. Then once they're at the event, they see what we call must-see content. So obviously that's going to be must-see to them. It may not be to you or to me or to others, but hopefully it's for your target audience. They would consider it must-see, so beauty is in the eye of the beholder there. And then we want to convert them. We want them to take action in the next step. So many online events or videos that we see. I think of the Super Bowl ads that just ran recently. So most of them didn't really tell you what to do. You might love the ad, you might love the product, but what do you do after that? Well, online events being a direct response medium, not only we want to get them to the event, but we want them to take a next step after that. We want them to try, buy, engage us in some other way. So in terms of context, especially those of you that are new to online events, you'll think, oh, well, this is easy. I can just set up an online event, and we have a great product, and we even have a great speaker I can recruit, and people will just flock to our online event in droves. Well, that's not the case, partly because there's a couple things that you're working against that mean that time is more valuable than money, and it's really difficult to get your prospects' attention. So for most of you today, if you're selling to an affluent consumer, a professional, or a business-to-business decision maker, on average, they're seeing over 3,000 advertising messages per day. So think about that, 3,000 messages per day. So even if you have what you think is the event of the year for them, at the starting gate, at a minimum, you're competing with close to 3,000 messages. Secondly, as you've probably seen wherever you go, literally people are on sometimes with multiple screens, multiple devices. It seems like almost 24/7, 365. So through the combination of the social media internet world that we live in with the multiple devices and smartphones combined with kind of Google's search capability, your prospects and market thinks the answer to any question is 7 seconds away. So if your message is does not get to the top of the pile, if you will, does not get their attention right away, you probably have about 8 seconds to get their attention. Even if it's the best event in the world in the marketplace that's totally relevant for them, you're not going to get them to attend. So recognizing this, then we also understand that Forrester Research, which is an independent research firm, estimates that whether you're talking to, in this case, I think the survey applies to really any market if you think about it, but in a vertical market that they surveyed, they found that roughly 66% of research happens before talking to your salesperson. So what we want to do is attract and engage your target market using online events, and then that will lead to folks that are deeper into the buying cycle. But if you don't get them on the board first, you're not going to get their attention. So the 3 C's, we're trying to make it memorable and easy to remember, but the first one is copy, and literally that's the words that you use to attract the audience to your event. So even if you're using a short video clip or social media or some other calling script, voicemail, anything like that, literally your copy or your promotion is going to be the words that you use to attract the audience to your event. Now, typically Dan Kennedy, who's one of the top marketers of I would say the last 30 years in direct marketing, especially in info marketing and educational marketing, and his line is basically if you have a room, whether it's a virtual room or a physical room, the amount of sales that you're going to create out of that room is the biggest factor is how many buyers do you have in that room. So you want to attract buyers with your marketing copy. And if we're thinking of trying to create marketing copy that sells, we can ask the questions, who decides that your online presentation sells? It's not me, it's not you, it's the market. When do you know that we'll have a blockbuster online event? The market will tell us. How do you create a blockbuster? And then obviously we're going to cover some of those guidelines today. So one of the biggest things that we see, especially in trying to appeal to wealthy consumers or business decision makers, is we try and just kind of focus on one side of their brain or the rational side. So our product has 72 features, the other products have 32. Well, the reality is we need to appeal to both their head and their heart, so both the rational side and the emotional side. So in trying to attract the right prospects to your event, you need to answer questions like, what keeps them up at night? Can you paint a picture of them? Have you walked in their shoes, so to speak? Do you know their hopes, dreams, and fears? And obviously, if you know these things, it will give you a leg up in terms of creating copy that will get their attention. Now, the way we get attention is obviously what we call a topic, a subject line, or the first line of the conversion page. So that's what's known as a headline. So a lot of people that come into the online event world or the content marketing world, they think, well, if I just hire a named speaker or name writer to write a report or to present my presentation, then they're going to be a draw. They're going to draw. I'm going to create a blockbuster event just by hiring this speaker. Well, actually, when we've done surveys over the year, and literally we've done surveys every year over the last 10 years in different markets, probably one like you're in, is we found that the topic of your event is going to be by far the biggest factor that's going to determine whether they attend or not. So the general topic is good, and then the specific topic will be your headline or subject line on your email, your ad for your ad, if you will. And if you want to be in the neighborhood of success here, think of featuring what will be the big life-changing aha that they will gain from their webinar. In other words, at a high level, after that hour is over, if that half hour is over, what's the big thing that they will have learned, or the big difference in their life or their business after they've attended the webinar? So you want to make a big promise there. The other way of thinking about it is when you make a sale of your product or service or offering, what's the major benefit or reason that they've tried or purchased that solution? So if you can feature that in the subject, in the topic, in the headlines, then you're typically going to be better off than just throwing something out there that's more you or company-centered. Now, a lot of times, especially it tends to be the bigger the company, the more this happens is you'll get an invitation, and I encourage you to, especially for online events, sign up for your competitors' events, sign up for other events, look at invitations, and look for some of the things that attract you to attend. But one of the things you see is they'll start talking about in the event itself, maybe you've never engaged this company before, and they're talking all about the product that they're going to sell you at the event. Well, what somebody really wants to know is is my life going to be better or different from the event, and typically talking about the product is going to be a turnoff. You want to make sure you tune into the same radio station, if you will, that your prospects do. So that's going to be what we call WIIFM. So they're thinking, what's in it for me? And it's from their perspective, not your perspective. So when you're creating copy that sells, if you will, you want to tune into the radio station that your prospects respond to. Secondly, and I see this a lot of times with technologies, not GoToWebinar specifically, but many times other technologies or in the implementation of trying to attract someone to an online event, is you may have someone on your list, for example, and send them a link and talk about an event, and you may have a great topic for event, so you got their attention, they click on that link, and it goes to the home page of your website. Or you require multiple clicks for them to go ahead and register. You want one click from invitation or promotion or ad, social media post, and so forth to register. So you want that registration page to be in the next click. And then there's a company called Lead Pages out there, which I'm sure many of you use, which actually integrates with GoToWebinar. And I attended a presentation of theirs recently, and they found that 10 of the 14 of their registration forms or conversion forms, the top 10 of 14 were webinar registration forms. So webinars are a great way of converting interest into that registration or action, but you want to do so using, for example, the fields on the upper right and then the selling text on the left, and having that button to register being really big and appearing easily. You don't want to have them go through multiple clicks to register for your event. So you're thinking, oh, well, this is interesting, and I should use some of these strategies, and but what's the upside? What's the leverage in a headline? Well, easily 500%. So that means if you have a good topic or headline or ad for your ad, if you will, that can produce easily 5 times more results. So I was working with a small company, and they had tried webinars on their own and had me look at what they were doing because they had only gotten 20 registrants to their event, but they thought it was a good strategy. They had seen some other companies in their particular market using it, and they said, well, I think it's something we're doing wrong. We only tried it once. We think we have a good presenter and a good presentation and so forth. So literally what I did is basically the biggest thing that I did was just change. I said, well, the topic that you're presenting on, the headline, I don't think that's benefit-oriented. That's not going to be a big aha. That's not going to create buyer excitement and so forth. So we changed that and then used, just tweaked the rest of their copy and made sure that we had featured benefits in the copy and then made it easy for people to register through that one-click process. So in this case, specific case, I think they were using a GoToWebinar registration form. So we literally went from 20 registrants to 187 registrants. So immediately that's a whole lot more than 5 times results. But if you think about the power of headlines and copy that sells, then here's a specific example. So, and then in addition, they went from basically no, in this case, sales opportunities or buying prospects directly from their first event to literally $3 million in possible sales opportunities quantified within 7 days of the event. So even just this one tweak of, especially if you have a good presentation or you're connecting with your audience, even just making the tweaks that we talked about here happen can lead to as much as 9 times more registrations, but certainly up to 500% more. Now, let's say you use good copy and make it easy for your target market to register. Let's say, for example, you figure out in your topic what are 1 or 2 or 3 of the top problems that our audience has. So let's say you're then in the neighborhood of an event that may be in a blockbuster in your market space and really move the needle. So in order to then take the next step, so we talked about copy and promotion, then once you get them to register for your event, then you want them to make a connection with you. And one way you do that is deliver what I call must-see content. So if you think about sort of a house analogy, I'm sure most of you have either looked for an apartment and rented an apartment or purchased a house. So you may have a sense for initially for the neighborhood that you want to be in, but that you go and visit 10 houses or 10 apartments, and one just grabs you and says, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So in your event, you want to connect with your audience, not necessarily by spending a lot of money on that specific speaker, but it's more important the content and some of the other things that they do within the event. So I would argue that must-see content typically has some of these features, so it's very relevant to your audience. You know, one of their top 3 problems, as I mentioned, it's new or newsworthy. So obviously if you have a new event that you're running, you don't want to just present, well, here's the same presentation we did 10 years ago. No, you want to make it updated for the times. For example, in some markets that I work in, the recent political events are things that they can then leverage in some of their presentations to refresh them or to develop a whole new presentation. We talked about talking about your audience's top problems. So one of the reasons that I talked about copy first on blockbuster events is literally everybody that I talk to wants more people to their events, right? And what are the keys of success to do that? They literally want to know, how do I do that? What do I do in terms of promotion? And I already shared with you that, well, you got to make sure your email invitation is, one of the ways that you're driving registrants to the event, because historically 80% of people attend on that basis. Even if you have a big social media following, it's not going to be the dog, if you will. It's going to be the tail. The dog of your promotions is typically going to be your email invitations to your lists and other lists. Your speaker, though, is, if you look at number 4, is there to deliver credibility and expertise. So they want to deliver the message. So I've literally done 1,000 webinars, and many other people speaking about webinars, it's literally their first. So obviously I can bring that experience and hopefully strategies. So hopefully there's a little more credibility there, and that it's not a speaker from the company, it's an outside speaker, and they have some expertise that they're sharing. One other thing that I find that many blockbuster events have, not only are they new or newsworthy, but they're not afraid to be controversial. In other words, if everybody is solving the problem that you speak about the same way, well, that's not going to be as interesting as sharing new data that's surprising, that hasn't been revealed before in a webinar that talks about the real problems, the real challenges, the real solutions to your issues. So we mentioned in terms of once you connect with them, you want to build your case with them on the actual event. So in terms of your content strategy, obviously part of that is best delivered by an outside speaker, especially if you're trying to draw your audience in for the first time. So if they don't have a relationship with your company, they're not on your email list, using an outside speaker is a great way of disarming the fact that you're going to be selling on the webinar. So obviously there will be selling in terms of even if it's just educational, giving your point of view. I would argue that's selling your company point of view, or selling your view on how a problem should be solved, or what's your view on your best practices. Certainly there will be education on the event, but it's best if at least part of that message, especially if you're top of the marketing funnel or mid-marketing funnel, I would say the average online event to Blockbuster will have at least one outside speaker or outside experts. Then, as we mentioned before, talk about the audience's challenges and or problems. So if you could spend, let's say, 40% of the time on the audience's problems or challenges, then that's a good rule of thumb to think about. So almost half the time then, and especially some of these top of the funnel presentations or introductory presentations, you really want to be connecting with that audience in a way and talking about them and their challenges is how you're going to do that. And then as we also talked about, especially if you're introducing what you're selling, you want to introduce a solution that's different or position it differently than others are in the marketplace. So if it's just ho-hum, it's the same thing that's offered out there, then it's not going to be that compelling for them to take the next step. So one way that you prove that it's a good solution, that you build on those credibility points to your selling points, is to give case studies or demonstrations or examples. So I've tried to share a couple of examples today and more in context of the presentation, but that's one way that you can present the benefits in a way that people can relate to. Don't forget then, in terms of if you are thinking about a restaurant, for example, there's some marketing or selling of the sizzle of the experience and then also the steak, so it's not just all about the steak. So, for example, in your case studies or in your demonstration or in talking about your product or solution, make sure that you talk about the specific ways or the specific benefits. Is there some cost savings, for example? Can somebody make more money? How will someone's life be different? Really dramatize it in a way and build up the value of it. And then also, so for example, because we have a really big audience on today, I'm not able to touch all of you in terms of answering your individual questions on the webinar itself. We will leave a little time to do that, so that's a good cue to go ahead and ask any questions that you have. But if you have a smaller group, certainly you can answer the questions as they come in or as appropriate. Secondly, you can also use a device that I'm using today that because I've done this presentation many times or talked to people about online events, I know that the typical or frequently asked questions, so I'm trying to answer a lot of them right in the content, which is good. So you don't necessarily have to take live audio questions, but you can use either planned questions or use a tool like GoToWebinar, which allows you to funnel questions and then take the ones that are most relevant or that are asked multiple times. Now, one of the biggest shortcuts that I've developed over time, I'm not sure in the process when I started doing this, but I work with a few companies generally on webinar series or online event series, so that's really when you start to build value over time, is not just to do a one-shot event, which may be incredibly successful, but to turn that event into a series. So typically what we'll do in that process is basically come up with a rough outline of content or select a speaker and we have a rough topic, but then we'll actually develop the invitation, or what we call an abstract, a short summary that we can use for marketing purposes for the event before we actually finalize our content, right? So it's easy then to make sure that your copy or your promotion is going to be a draw, and that you also cover in the content the things that people want to hear at the event. So that's a quick shortcut that you can use as well. And then as we talked about, if you can have a winning topic or a topic that appeals to your audience, talks about the biggest benefits, the big aha, and then also speak to, let's say as a rule of thumb, 5 things that they'll learn at the webinar. So what will they discover? So what are the specific things that they'll learn, and promote those in benefit language. So not just you'll talk about X, Y, and Z regulation, but what building on that, what is the value of knowing that information? Will you avoid some compliance mistakes? Will you be able to position your company better, and so forth? So make sure you're connecting as well, not only with the emotions or the heart in your topic, but then also in the rest of your invitation. So in terms of converting, I would say many folks that even for the first time creating an online event, they'll be able to do those first 2 steps of copy that sells, and they'll be able to connect with their audience somehow and build the case. They'll position themselves. So basically, if you think of basketball, I'm not very good at basketball, but I can make a lot of layups if no one's there and I'm right in front, right under the basket. So if you do a good job of the first 2 steps, in essence, this last step of conversion, pulling your attendees and into the next step, is really a layup. But I would say most events that I see, and you can go watch 10, I think you'll experience the same thing, most of them don't have a next step that they define, and they don't ask for a decision from their prospects, if you will, that they're going to ask for more information. So one of the strategies you can use is explicitly tell them exactly what you want them to do, so leave no doubt. So I'll give you an example in a minute, but if you can be very specific about your instructions, that's helpful. You can present an irresistible offer. I'll give an example of that in a minute. You'll want to call them to action. So basically, here's what I'd like you to do, followed by telling them what to do. And then instead of thinking of your next steps as selling them in the classic sense, so we didn't talk a lot today about when you're connecting with your audience, we don't use fancy sales words or sales strategies. We don't need 101 closing techniques. We really just want to focus on what the next step is, and it should be leading them to that next step. And then you want to make it easy for them to take that next step. So I'll give you this example here, since we got a little bit of a late start. But basically, everybody who's on this presentation, one of the next steps you can have is you can request a report that we've done that others have really enjoyed. You can get it free, and you just email me at bhanson@qlmarketing.com. Just say, I'd like the free report. It's how to double B2B sales with automated webinars. So that's a very simple example of a next step or a call to action. And I made sure I presented it before the Q&A, because if we get to the top of the hour, which we're going to, and answering questions as fast as we can, then some of you may have to go on to your next endeavor, but you want to present that earlier on. So I mentioned I was going to give you a little nugget here about creating an irresistible offer. So especially as you're moving prospects through the buying process with your events, you want to create what we call a unique bundle of product or services to increase the perceived value. So I'll talk more about that in a second, but then you want to compare it to other solutions at a fraction of the cost. So I don't know of anyone else that has the free report that I have there, and obviously it connects to you're interested in a topic like that because you're here at this webinar. You want to reverse the risk and guarantee. So if you're asking for money, give them a free 30-day money-back guarantee. Offer a limited time, so your irresistible offer after they attend the webinar. There's special pricing that's available for 48 hours or through the end of the month and so forth. And obviously then we talked about calling them to action. But one of the quick hit strategies, a nugget that I've seen work very well, is if you have a product, you want to add a service to it. If you have a service, you want to add a product. So with your online events, if you want someone to take the next step and try or buy, you make a special offer available, and you bundle in, whether it's your company or another company, a product with a service or a service with a product. And then the nice thing that you can do is, let's say you have a 30-day service that you offer or a 30-day supply of a product. So you can go ahead and that can be part of your offer. You're not promising to deliver some sort of product for a year, or if you're offering implementation services, you're not promising 5 months of implementation services. Maybe it's just a day, which is worth a certain amount. But if you can do that, and especially tie in other companies that where it's their on-ramp to their product, then or service, then you can create a unique bundle that has a high perceived value that then will drive a lot of excitement from the event. So in terms of these overall strategies, and especially in terms of really delivering an irresistible offer and a limited time call to action, I worked with a company where they focused on one specific role within the sale. So it actually wasn't the decision maker in a B2B sale that, a lot of organizations like yours, you may have 7 people that are involved in the decision that you're selling to, or maybe high-end consumer. A lot of times it's a couple or family, but they selected one role within that. It was the user of their actual offering, and they created a webinar series to reach and educate this group. Leveraged outside lists and speakers. So when they brought in an outside speaker, if they were hiring them or partnering with them, they may say, well, do you have a list that you can invite to this online event? And they would typically hit some of the same themes and topics over time. Just think of every month hitting one of the top 3 pain points that their market has. And they also did what I talked about here is not only do you want to turn your blockbuster event into a series, but you also want to hit, if you divide your marketing funnel into 3 stages, top, mid, and bottom, use online events and videos. Each of those stages of the funnel, you'll be probably the only one in your marketplace that will be doing that. That will be literally a competitive advantage. So you may or may not experience the same results that this company did. So they had 50 webinars per year. Some of them were more automated and video-based, and got as many as 15,000 registrants to those in a single year. And just largely driven by this online event series, using the strategies that we talked about today, they multiplied sales 4 times in 36 months with a small marketing budget. So literally going back to where we started here, when you're approaching this, if you want to have the blockbuster event in your marketplace, if you want to use a strategy like that we talked about today, online events that reach literally every one of your prospects, you'll want to do these 3 things in terms of being successful. So have copy that attracts your audience to the event. You want to connect on the event with both the knowledge of their problems and how you solve them, and then you'll want to convert them to the next step with an irresistible offer or an easy way of moving them from the event to the next step in the buying process. So good. So at this time, I'll kind of dig in and try and pull. I see there's a lot of questions there. I'll try and get to yours. If I don't have time to get to yours, then I'll go ahead and send you a follow-up email directly. So when we talked about email lists, and again, if you didn't submit your question, just go ahead, use the GoToWebinar interface there and submit your question, and we'll get to the ones that are topical here and then follow up with you later. But the first question is around the email lists. If we're using the GoToMeeting/GoToWebinar service by LogMeIn, does the email list come from that or somewhere else? So if you think about the list, the promotional list that we mentioned before, that list comes from outside of GoToWebinar. So basically, if you're holding a webinar and using their registration forms, what will happen is you'll promote, let's say you have a newsletter list or prospect list, your own opt-in list. So you want to be able to promote your event to that list. And then basically the link will then send people to register on a GoToWebinar registration form. And then once they register, yes, the reminder notices will come from the GoToWebinar interface, but people are opting into your list there, so it's really your control. But basically the GoToWebinar tool has a what we call a registration to attendee sequence that you can run, and let's say it's 48 hours, 3 hours, and 1 hour before the event, or just a confirmation upon registration and then 2 reminders before the event. That'll help you turn what we call registrants into revenue by trying to maximize the number of people that attend from your registration list. Oh, the company that we mentioned, and this is just one example. The question is, what was the company that was connected to GoToWebinar that has successful email template invites? Actually, what we talked about was they have through an API or a little technology connector, you can use certain other technologies like CRM systems like Marketo or HubSpot and so forth, and you could use those to send out your emails. And then basically through the connector there, when somebody registers on your page, that will go directly into GoToWebinar. But the company that I mentioned was a company called Lead Pages. So one of the areas that they have is registration forms that then will go directly into GoToWebinar, and then you can use GoToWebinar for your reminder sequences and webinar technology and so forth. My audience comprises varying income groups. Some of them are lower income. So one of the things that we run into is if, let's say, either you don't have a big marketing budget or you can't afford a lot in terms of cost per sale. So if someone has a lower income, implicit in that is typically that the lifetime value of the client is going to be lower, or the thing that you're selling is a lower dollar amount. So webinars are a great way of lowering your cost to recruit a customer, and in this case, maybe a cheaper item, whether the market has money or not, it's less important. But basically, partly because you're using an all-digital strategy, and then whether you have 1 or 1,000 registrants that you get for your online event, basically through a tool like GoToWebinar, then you'll be able to have the same cost of delivery. And then also keep in mind that with online events, then like we're doing today, you can record your event and it can be available for playback later, and it can be a specific content asset in itself. So, for example, typically, you're going to get more people to register for a live event because it has that sort of immediacy, the urgency, so it's happening in a specific place and time. And then another benefit of a live event is that the attendees will be able to ask questions, hopefully of an expert. So the way you position that is you'll be able to get your top questions answered about this topic. But then once you have the video, then you can drive, how do you drive more than 50%, let's say half the registrants come to your live event? Well, how do you increase those viewer numbers? Because basically the more viewers that you have, the more sales you have if you do it right. So basically you use a recording, and obviously the recording then can be used as a video. So your video doesn't have to be, a $5 million commercial that then goes on YouTube, but it can be something that's gated content that somebody has to register for on your website. Another question was, we mentioned newsletters, sort of email lists. So how do we build our email list if that's our primary way of generating webinar registrants? Yeah, so I'll just give you one quick strategy is obviously if you have social media connections, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, you can turn those connections and followers into folks that are on your email list by having a webinar. So when they register for your webinar, you can promote it through your social channels. Another way is to work with an outside organization like a media organization, somebody who also has a newsletter list, a distributor, or somebody who has a complementary product or service, somebody who already has an email list that's similar to your prospect list. So you can work with them, and they could in fact be a joint sponsor of your webinar, or you can rent their list, and they will actually physically do the mailing. You won't be buying their list, but you'll be able to promote to their email list. So as I mentioned, another great way of building your email list through this process is to bring in outside speakers who have a social media email following, and then they can go ahead and invite their followers to the event. We have a quick kind of thank you message that we'll do now. Turn it back over to you, Paula.
Thank you. If you would like more information from GoToWebinar by LogMeIn, please call 888-646-0014.